Have you ever wondered what goes through your avoidant ex's mind when you finally stop reaching out, when the texts stop coming, when the calls end, when the silence becomes permanent? Today, I'm revealing the 6 powerful realizations that hit them like a freight train when you disappear from their life for good. And I promise you, number 4 will completely shift how you see this entire situation. I've spent years studying attachment theory and working with thousands of people navigating breakups with avoidant partners. What I'm about to share isn't just theory, it's based on real patterns, real confessions, and real transformations. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what's happening in their mind, why the silence is so powerful, and most importantly, what this means for your own healing journey. So let's dive in. The first thing that crashes into their awareness is the sudden absence of their safety net. See, avoidant individuals thrive on a specific dynamic. Distance makes them comfortable. But here's the contradiction. They also need to know you're still there somewhere in the background, validating their worth. When you were reaching out, checking in, or even just liking their posts, you were unknowingly providing something they desperately needed, the assurance that they still mattered to you without the pressure of actual intimacy. The moment that stops, panic sets in. For the first time, they're forced to sit with the reality that you might actually be moving on. Not in theory, not eventually, right now. They start to question, wait, did I miscalculate? Did I push too far this time? The safety net they took for granted, your attention, your care, your emotional availability suddenly vanishes. And that realization, terrifying for someone who always assumed you'd be waiting. Think about it from their perspective. For weeks, months, maybe even years, they could retreat into their cave, knowing full well that when they emerged, you'd still be there. Your consistency became their comfort zone. They could have their space and your devotion simultaneously. It was the perfect arrangement for someone terrified of both intimacy and abandonment. But now that equation has been disrupted. Predictable pattern they relied on has shattered. They can no longer retreat with the confidence that you'll be there upon their return. This creates a profound disorientation in their world. Suddenly, the relationship isn't operating on their terms anymore. The invisible tether they thought connected you has been severed, and they're left floating in uncertainty. What makes this realization so powerful is that it often hits them in waves. At first, they might not even notice. They're used to the distance, after all. But then a day passes, then a week, then a month, and slowly the absence of your presence begins to register. They might catch themselves reaching for their phone to text you, only to remember that you're no longer engaging. They might see something that reminds them of you and instinctively want to share it, only to realize that door is closed. Each of these small moments compounds into a larger awareness. The safety net is gone, and they're the reason why. Here's where things get psychological. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant partner likely held most of the control. They decided when to pull close, when to create distance, when to respond, when to disappear. Your silence, it completely flips the script. Now, they're the one wondering, they're the one checking their phone, they're the one questioning whether they made a mistake. This is the first time in possibly the entire relationship where they're not in the driver's seat. And for someone who uses control as a coping mechanism for their fear of vulnerability, this shift is massive. They start to notice little things, the read receipts that never come, the social media activity that doesn't include them, the mutual friends who mention that you're doing well without them. each silence becomes louder than any text you could have sent. And in that silence, they begin to understand something profound. They no longer control your emotional world. You're no longer orbiting around their need for space. You've created your own gravity. This power shift is particularly unsettling for avoidant individuals because control has always been their primary defense mechanism. When they feel things getting too close, too intense, too vulnerable, they pull away. That pulling away has always worked in the past. It created the distance they needed while simultaneously making you chase harder, thereby validating their desirability. But this time, something different happened. You didn't chase, you didn't fight for them. You simply withdrew your energy and invested it elsewhere. Breaks the entire dynamic they've come to expect and rely upon. Now, they're experiencing what you experienced, the anxiety of uncertainty, the discomfort of wanting connection, but not having it, the vulnerability of caring about someone who isn't prioritizing you. It's a complete role reversal, and it's deeply uncomfortable. They might find themselves doing things they never thought they'd do, checking your social media multiple times a day, asking mutual friends about you, driving past places they know you frequent, or even drafting texts they never send. The person who always prided themselves on being unbothered and independent is suddenly bothered and preoccupied. And the most powerful part, you didn't have to say a single word to create this shift. Your absence speaks louder than any conversation you could have. Now we enter what I call the romanticization phase. When you were present and available, your avoidant X likely focused on your flaws, the incompatibilities, the reasons why the relationship wouldn't work. It's a defense mechanism, deactivating strategies that help them justify emotional distance. But when you're gone, when you're truly, completely gone, the lens changes. Suddenly, they start remembering the good times, the inside jokes, the way you understood them in ways others didn't, the comfort you provided that they never acknowledged while they had it. This isn't necessarily because they've had some profound emotional breakthrough. It's often because the threat is gone. You're no longer too close. You're no longer triggering their intimacy fears. Distance allows them to idealize what they lost without the discomfort of actual closeness. They might scroll through old photos, replay old conversations, wonder what you're doing, who you're with, whether you think about them at all. The irony, they're finally feeling what you felt when they were distant, longing, curiosity, and a desperate desire to reconnect. But now the roles are reversed. This idealization process can be incredibly intense. Suddenly, all the things they criticized or took for granted become precious memories. Your laugh that they once found too loud becomes endearing. Your desire for quality time that they labeled as clingy becomes proof of your devotion. Your emotional expressiveness that made them uncomfortable becomes a sign of your depth and authenticity. They begin to construct a highlight reel in their mind, conveniently editing out all the moments where they pulled away, shut down, or made you feel unwanted. The relationship becomes romanticized into something it never quite was while you were in it. And here's the psychological trap they fall into, because they're no longer feeling pressured or crowded. They can finally access positive feelings about the relationship. But these feelings aren't based on reality. They're based on the safety of distance. If you were to suddenly become available again, there's a strong possibility that their old patterns would resurface. The closeness would trigger their fears again, and the cycle would repeat. This is why the idealization phase, while validating in some ways, doesn't necessarily indicate real change or growth on their part. This is the realization that truly changes everything. Avoidant individuals often construct narratives that protect their ego and justify their behavior. They were too needy. It just wasn't meant to be. I need my freedom. These stories help them avoid accountability and maintain their self-image. But your permanent silence, it disrupts their entire narrative. They can't paint you as desperate when you've stopped reaching out. They can't label you as too much when you've given them exactly what they claim to want, space. They can't position themselves as the one who had to set boundaries when you're the one who walked away and stayed away. Your absence becomes a mirror that reflects their own behavior back at them. And here's the kicker. They can't rewrite your silence. They can't minimize it, rationalize it, or control how it makes them look to themselves, to their friends, to anyone who knows the story. For perhaps the first time, they're forced to sit with the possibility that maybe, just maybe they're the one who messed up. This cognitive dissonance, the gap between their protective narrative and the reality of your absence, creates an internal crisis that no amount of rationalization can fix. Think about how carefully constructed their self-narrative has been throughout the relationship, and probably in previous relationships too. They've positioned themselves as the reasonable one, the one who needed healthy space, the one who was just protecting themselves from someone who wanted too much, too fast. These narratives have allowed them to walk away from relationships without taking responsibility for the patterns they perpetuate. But your silence doesn't fit into any of these narratives. If you were truly needy or desperate, you'd still be reaching out. If you were truly incapable of respecting boundaries, you wouldn't have given them permanent space. If you were truly the problem, they should feel relief and vindication, but they don't. Instead, they feel confused, unsettled, and increasingly aware that the story they've been telling themselves doesn't match the reality of what's happening. This is perhaps the most psychologically destabilizing realization for them, because it threatens their entire self-concept. They've built their identity around being the independent one, the one who doesn't need anyone, the one who leaves before they can be left. Your silence forces them to confront the possibility that their independence is actually avoidance. Their self-protection is actually self-sabotage, and their pattern of leaving isn't strength, it's fear. Up until this point, on some level, they believe they could always come back. Avoidant individuals often operate with what psychologists call phantom X syndrome, keeping former partners in a mental filing cabinet marked available if I change my mind. But your sustained silence starts to crack that assumption. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and the silence doesn't break. That's when the fear becomes real. What if this is actually permanent? What if they can't just reach out in 6 months and pick up where they left off? What if you've actually moved on emotionally, romantically, completely? This fear manifests in different ways. Some might breadcrumb, sending a casual hey or liking an old post, testing whether you're still accessible. Others might spiral internally, obsessing over whether they made the biggest mistake of their life. The difference between this fear and genuine change is crucial to understand. Fear of loss doesn't automatically equal readiness for a healthy relationship, but it does signal that your absence has created a consequence they can't ignore. For someone who spent the relationship convinced they could always retreat and return at will, the possibility of a permanently closed door is a profound wake-up call. This fear of permanent loss often triggers what's known as a protest behavior in attachment theory, they might suddenly reach out with urgent or emotional messages. They might manufacture reasons to contact you, returning belongings, asking questions they already know the answers to, or creating drama that requires your attention. They might even make grand gestures or promises of change. But here's what's critical to understand. These behaviors are often driven by the panic of loss rather than genuine transformation. The fear of losing you forever can temporarily override their avoidant tendencies, making them appear more available and emotionally present than they've ever been. However, if that fear is the primary motivator rather than actual personal growth and self-awareness, the old patterns will likely resurface once they feel secure again. Permanence of your absence forces them to grapple with finality in a way they've probably never had to before. For someone who has always kept their options open, who has always maintained a sense of control over their relationships, the realization that they can't undo this particular ending is earth-shattering. Finally, the sustained silence, if they're self-aware enough, comes the most important realization of all. They begin to understand that their avoidant patterns cost them something real. Not every avoidant ex will reach this point. Some will simply move on, repeat the pattern with someone new, and never do the internal work. But others, especially those who genuinely cared, will face an uncomfortable truth. Their fear of intimacy, their need for control, their inability to show up consistently. These weren't just personality quirks. They were barriers that destroyed something valuable. Your silence becomes the catalyst for self-reflection they never engaged in while you were around. They might start to recognize patterns from previous relationships. They might notice how they sabotage closeness whenever it feels too real. They might finally connect the dots between their childhood wounds and their adult relationship behaviors. This is the realization that could actually lead to change, not for your benefit, but for their own growth. And here's what you need to understand. Whether or not they reach this point isn't your responsibility. Your job isn't to teach them this lesson. Your silence isn't a strategy to fix them or win them back. Your silence is for you. It's a boundary. It's self-respect. It's the declaration that you will no longer accept breadcrumbs, uncertainty, or emotional unavailability. This internal reckoning, when it happens, is often triggered by the accumulation of all the previous realizations. The loss of the safety net, the power shift, the idealization, the narrative disruption, and the fear of permanent loss all converge into a moment of clarity where they can no longer avoid the truth about themselves. They might begin therapy. They might read books on attachment theory. They might have vulnerable conversations with trusted friends about their relationship patterns. They might journal, reflect, and sit with uncomfortable emotions they've spent their entire life running from. This is genuine growth, and it's beautiful when it happens, but it's also important to recognize that this growth, if it occurs, will take time, often years. It requires consistent effort, professional support, and a genuine commitment to change that goes far beyond the fear of losing one specific person. And while it's natural to hope that your ex reaches this point of self-awareness and transformation, your healing journey cannot be dependent on whether they do or not. The most important reckoning is your own, recognizing your worth, understanding your patterns, and committing to choosing differently in the future. So what does your avoidant ex realize when you never reach out again? They realize that actions have consequences, that people won't wait forever, that love without reciprocity eventually runs out. they realized that you were never the problem. Their inability to show up was, but here's the most important part. None of this matters as much as what you realize. You realize your worth isn't determined by whether someone with avoidant attachment can finally see it. You realize that silence isn't punishment, it's peace. You realize that the right person won't make you feel like you're too much or not enough. The moment you stop reaching out isn't about them anymore. It's about you reclaiming your power, your time, and your emotional energy. And that's the realization that truly changes everything. If this resonated with you, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe. If you haven't already, then drop a comment below sharing where you are in your healing journey. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And remember, healing isn't linear, but every day you choose yourself as a step forward. I'll see you in the next one.